Afternoon and welcome to another conversation regarding the important topic of housing. And now more than ever, we have to continue to have this conversation and make sure that we have a shared knowledge of the big challenge that the state of Rhode Island is facing when it comes to housing and the big crisis that we're in the middle of right now. I want to welcome Secretary of Commerce, Stefan Pryor. Thank you for joining me again in this conversation.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor.
It's a pleasure.
We have been able this series.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure having the opportunity to co-host these conversations with you. We have done, this is like our fourth or fifth conversation, right?
I thought it was the 100th. I love it.
Thank you. The discussion today is going to help us inform a larger conversation around the topic of housing. We are building our shared knowledge so we can get to a point and we can all could come together and have a bigger conversation around the topic of housing and how we can address it and make changes. We're bringing different stakeholders together, different expertise that have information that is useful for us on how we can participate on making sure that we address the housing crisis within the state of Rhode Island. For today, we're going to hear from three different panelists. We're going to hear from Christine Hunsinger. Christine Hunsinger, she comes from Rhode Island Housing, and she's going to give us an update on the rent relief program and let us know how things are going with that. And then we're going to hear from Brenda Clement, who's the director from HousingWorks, just Executive Director from HousingWorks. And also we're going to hear from Frank Shea, who is the director from the Women's Development Corporation. I have had the pleasure to work with both Brenda and with Frank for many years in this housing arena, and it's a pleasure that we're going to have this conversation today. But now I'm just going to turn it over to Secretary Pryor to give us an overview of what is happening from the perspective of commerce. Secretary Pryor has been leading the Commerce office. And the Commerce has a lot to do with everything that is happening in the state of Rhode Island when it comes to the economy and also when it comes to housing. So Secretary, can you tell us how things are going?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor. We really appreciate this continuing series. And in all seriousness, it's been an honor to co-host with you here on the issue of housing and in the governor and lieutenant governor's 2030 process. I'm going to talk about that and how that interlocks with our discussion around housing. We're very pleased that Commerce, in concert with the governor's office, of course, and the lieutenant governor's office, is helping to coordinate and orchestrate for ever more investment in housing. So let me talk about a few things. We're so grateful to Brenda Clement, who is one of our guests today, for the HousingWorks fact book that was just issued just a matter of days ago. And for her incredible work. By the way, thank you also to Chris Hunsinger for all of her work on the rent relief program. But Brenda's fact book includes a couple of things, Lieutenant Governor, that I want to highlight. I'm sure Brenda will cover these points as she gives us the broader view, but to underscore, we're not building enough housing. And the pricing continues to push people out of the market rather than invite them in. In 2020, we built approximately half of what we built in the early 2000s in Rhode Island, 1374 units in 2020 versus 2,836, 1,300-ish versus 2,800-ish in 2005. So we're underbuilding, even if we reference against ourselves. On the home ownership side, at the end of 2021's first quarter, Rhode Island had a mere 1.3 month supply of sales housing stock. That's a 50% drop in inventory from quarter one of 2020. We don't have enough supply. We do not have enough supply. On the rental side, the vacancy rate in rental housing fell to 2.2% in quarter one 2021 compared to what's the healthy range, which is 5, maybe 8%. We've reviewed these stats before. It's helpful that Brenda has compiled them for us now in this fact book that I commend to everyone listening and watching. We've got work to do. Now, there's a lot of good news too. It is the case that with this tight housing market and with the inadequate supply, we are crowding out especially the lowest income residents, the individuals who really can't afford these pressures in the market. We must focus on affordability. But there is good news. Thanks to the Lieutenant Governor, Sabina Matos, our co-host, and of course to Governor McKee for his leadership, there is a down payment plan in front of the General Assembly that includes 3 components: small business relief, child care because of the crisis in the child care sector and its interlocking nature with the economy, and housing, aiming to do immediate work in the housing domain to build upon what we've got going. So there's a proposal to invest an additional $29.5 million of the federal American Rescue Plan money that is in the state's hands immediately in housing. It's part of the larger $100 and change million plan that is about 10% of the overall 1.1 billion. There'll still be $1 billion left, Lieutenant Governor, even if we take these immediate steps. And just to run through very, very quickly what's involved in the 29.5 million, supporting affordable housing production and site acquisition, $15 million to incentivize the development and renovation of affordable housing, $12 million for a property acquisition grant program, helps us get properties in the mix to produce new housing units, including for supportive housing units for individuals who are currently homeless, individuals who need shelter, promoting housing stability with a $1.5 million component for such programming to expand housing navigation, stabilization, and mental health services, and some more capacity, Lieutenant Governor, to carry out all of this work, about $500,000 for more capacity in Mike's shop, the Office of Housing and Community Development, Mike Tondra, who continues to do a great job. So those were the main points I wanted to make. I want to say one other thing. Of course, the theme for today is the municipal role. How do cities and towns partner and take initiative in order to produce and preserve housing? I want to say a couple things about that. First of all, it's an absolutely central part of the picture. We can't get it done without the planning, zoning, resource allocation, energy injection of towns that are interested in producing more housing. There are new tools available for this purpose. One of them that I want to highlight in conclusion is that Commerce has a site readiness program. It's a $1 million program in the Commerce budget in which we can help a town that's interested. It's an opt-in, a town that's interested, get a site ready for housing development. There are other forms of development that are eligible too. We've had examples already across our state in previous years of this program that's only existed for a couple of years. And what I want to say is that if there is an application out right now, if you're a municipal leader, or for that matter, a developer looking to do housing, and there's planning issues, zoning issues, site readiness issues, you need to rehab a site, you need to acquire and assemble sites, you need to do environmental remediation. If there's a little dose of dollars that will help you get there, there's an application open right now. Check out commerceri.com. That's the Commerce website, commerceri.com, and specifically commerceri.com/site-readiness. And you can find the forms. I commend that to everyone involved. Lieutenant Governor, thank you again so much for making this forum possible. And back to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Secretary. We're going to make sure that before we finish this conversation, we add the link to the chat. So anyone that's looking for it, so we're going to make sure it's added. Secretary, I know you have a commitment soon after this. You're going to stay with us as long as you can.
A housing hearing in the House. As a matter of fact, I am sprinting to the State House for a low and moderate income task force meeting. So that is why I need to depart.
Yes, and that is a reminder to everyone that our conversation today is going to be shorter because of that, because we all want to make sure that we make it to the meeting that's going to happen at 1:15 right after this conversation. But thank you, Secretary.
Thank you, ma'am.
Next, I just want to a disclaimer that should have made at the beginning. Even though this conversation is only in English, we do have the translations of the presentations, and those are being added. to the chat also. So if anyone can have access, we're gonna add both the English and the Spanish version of the presentations will be added. Just gonna say the same thing in Spanish. Si alguien está viendo esta transmisión ahora mismo y quiere acceso a la información, aunque no tenemos todo el evento traducido al español, sí tenemos las diapositivas traducidas al español y se van a estar agregando en el chat, en el área de comentarios de esta transmisión. Así que usted puede tener acceso a esas presentaciones. ¿Okay? Thank you. So now I just want to go back to our presentation. And as I said earlier, we are going to be getting an update on how are we doing with the rent relief program. This is very important. We always get phone calls about it, how things are going. We're getting a lot of questions about it. So it's really my pleasure to welcome Christine Hunsinger. She's the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer for Rhode Island Housing. Christine, welcome. Tell us how things are going.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. They're going really well. As I joined this chat, we have over $44.8 million approved, not counting the $16 million bulk payment we made to Grid. So we're at 60 million, over 60 million out, and we've helped over 5,900 families stay in their homes through this program. So we were slow getting out of the gate, but we are really cranking now. And you can see on this slide where the different buckets are of applicants who are in what phase of the process. So we've got 2,000 that we're working with to get additional information from that we can move to approval, and very, very few, very small percentage of folks who are denied by the program. So we're working as fast as we can and approve over on average over $1 million a day. So we feel like we're getting that money out there now.
Right, thank you. What are the biggest hurdles right now that you have found with the program, like with getting the applications processed? Is it people coming in, or is it just documents? What is it?
Right, so still completing the application, right? We have streamlined it. We've made it much simpler. We've retrained partners. But there still is, a requirement that you make application, that you fill it out, and that you provide some documentation. So filling out that self-attestation is really, really important. We retrain partners to make sure that they knew how to advise folks to do that. What we see on the pop-up events that we have in the community is that people just don't have all of their stuff in one place. So it takes them several times. So when they come in, they can save where they are and come back. And so that's where really the delay is, getting all of their papers in one place to be able to complete it. But we've got pretty significant amount of staff working on the program, a lot of them tasked with the ability to approve applications. So it is moving much, much better than it had been. We're seeing fewer phone calls at the call center. And we're doing much more community outreach and setting up events, which I think is on the next slide, to see some of the events that are coming up. So we do have staff in Central Falls City Hall on Thursdays and Fridays. Those are by appointment only. So there is on our website, RentReliefRI.com. You can find out the different partners and where to call. Also, we've got partner staff at the Progresso Latino Food Pantry every Monday and Wednesday, and appearing there with folks who speak different languages, working to get a Creole speaker over there in the next few weeks. So on the next slide, you'll see things that we are planning. So in-person events, Pawtucket, Warwick, Providence, and Woonsocket, working with DCYF youth that are aging out of foster care to get them into the program, make sure that they have access to these resources, the Cape Viridian community and AARP. And as you may or may not have seen, your PSA Lieutenant Governor is up and running this week. So
Haven't seen it. I'm glad it's there. We did it both languages, English and Spanish, to make sure we get the message out. Thank you. So thank you so much for this update. We are looking forward to continue to be a partner with you, with Rhode Island Housing, and to get the word out. So please just let us know if anything else that we can do. Okay.
thank you so much.
You're welcome. If we get any questions, we're going to make sure from this broadcast, we make sure that we send it over to you. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we just want to thank Christine again for this information, but now we're going to get back to the conversation about the housing crisis that we are and how we got here. And for that conversation, I'm so glad that we have Brenda Clement, who is going to give us some very important information. She just had this wonderful event that Secretary Pryor says, in which she released a fact book with information about where we are right now in Rhode Island when it comes to housing. So Brenda, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation, and happy to come to talk about some of the information in our annual fact book. Our fact book can be found on our website at HousingWorksRI.org, and we're also happy to share and to send a copy with folks. So I'm going to just review a few of the top headlines, if you will, from the fact book, and then talk a little bit more too about how the role of municipalities in the development of affordable housing, and I think some opportunities as well. So happy to share with you. I think the first couple of slides just tell you a little bit about HousingWorks, and we were founded in 2004, actually for the very first housing bond campaign way back when, and we were integrated into Roger Williams in 2014. And our role with our research is to try to connect the dots between housing affordability and economic growth, but also in how outcomes in health and educational achievement as well too. We publish our annual fact book, but we also publish a number of other reports and information and data. And we have a great team here at HousingWorks that is always happy to come out and share the information that we have. We can keep going. So this year, our fact book in particular, working very closely with the Department of Health team, who has an internal team focused on housing issues and programs as well. Too, we emphasized and added more data about social determinants of health. This was a topic of conversation well before COVID, but COVID highlighted again the critical need for us to address the underlying housing issues in our state because of the tremendous impact that not only the lack of housing has on it, but also the quality and condition of our housing. Rhode Island has some of the oldest housing stock in the country, particularly our multifamily housing stock, and it has huge impacts on health issues for many individuals. We have some of the highest asthma rates in both children and adults, and a lot of that is tied back to environmental contaminants in their homes. So we're continuing to look for ways to work with Department of Health about how to show this data, but also more importantly, how to get resources out to help address some of these social determinants. And so just a quick overview of some of the statistics. I'm not going to read all of these because and there's a lot of data here. So I'm assuming the PowerPoint will be shared afterwards, or people will be able to access it. But a couple of things to point out. As I said, we've been doing an annual fact book now for a long period of time, but this was the very first time since we've been tracking data that the median household income in Rhode Island of $67,000 cannot affordably buy in any municipality. Wow. Home ownership doors are shut in most communities for people earning the median or a little bit less. And this is a critical thing to point out for a number of reasons. One is because for most of us, owning something or owning our home is what creates some economic stability in your life and your family. And for when we do not provide those home ownership opportunities for even the median income renters in our state, we are having a long-term impact on economic security for those families. The rate, and that number is even more alarming and disturbing. The homeownership rate for white households is 68%, which is double that of Black households and more than double of Latinos. So as we see growing economic and ethnic diversity in our neighborhoods and our communities throughout the state, homeownership, particularly for Black and Latino homeowners, is extremely difficult to achieve as well too. So a long-term plan and need to address that issue is certainly something to focus our conversation on. And right now, even if you're the median renter income of $36,000, you can only afford to rent in one municipality. Who was at Factbook last Friday? Anyone remember? I don't think anybody.
So it was Burrillville and Woonsocket?
It was Burrillville,
Right,
correct.
So Burrillville
yes.
was the only one.
Yes,
You
good,
see, I was
good
there. I
memory,
was paying
Lieutenant
attention.
Yes, Burrillville, and in large part, I think Burrillville is a great example of a community who has worked very closely with a nonprofit in their area, our great colleague NeighborWorks Blackstone Valley, and looked hard at where they needed to grow and develop. And so they're definitely a model for us to look to. Even if you're earning $50,000 or less, you can only afford to rent in two communities, and Woonsocket and Burrillville are those two communities. So a lot of more statistics on this slide about why housing is key and social determinants. I've already mentioned some of them, particularly around our age of housing stock. Also want to point out that 23% of adults who are 65 and over have a disability and live in older homes. And by just a few years away, 1 out of 4 Rhode Islanders will be 65 years or older. And so the impact on housing is going to be critical, and the needs for their housing needs will be changing dramatically as well too. And so again, a lot to do in that fact. And I will also point out that sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to tell you that this data is so crucial. So the median household income of $67,000 cannot afford to buy a house in the state of Rhode Island. I mean, this is just what else we need to show what a big crisis we are in the middle of right now.
Yeah, no, agreed. And, I mean, the other end is other end of the economic spectrum. It's no better. A number of unsheltered adults increased by 68% from 2020 to 2021. And I think more disturbing from our perspective is looking at the high growth occupations in Rhode Island, according to Rhode Island's DLT's projections. Of those 11,000 jobs that are expected to grow, 72% do not pay enough to affordably rent Rhode Island's average 2-bedroom. So in order to grow economically, particularly for lower wage workers, we have to increase the stock, and we have to be able to lower the cost of rental moving forward.
Thank you.
I think we can keep going. I don't want to, and you, Lieutenant Governor, please, I will talk about this forever. So when you want me to stop talking, please tell me.
This is important information.
So just a couple more highlights. The median household income in 34 municipalities would not affordably support the home price. So again, we've another way to look at that data and details as well. Percentage of renter cost burden households ranges from 18% to 72%, depending on which community you're in as well too. When I'm talking about cost burden, I'm talking if the federal government defines housing affordability as paying no more than 1/3 of your income towards housing. So if you're spending more than 1/3 of your gross income on your housing expenses, you're considered cost burden. So what does that mean, really? Well, if you're at the higher income level, if you're, at $100,000 or more, or 75,000, maybe you'd have put less into your retirement plan, or you put less into your savings account, or you forego a trip or a vacation, well, when we can all travel again, I guess. But at the lower income level, those choices become much more dire. Our colleagues at the food bank say all the time that rent eats first. People try desperately to pay the rent, to keep the rent roof over their head, but then are forced to use food pantries and food support programs and other things in order to meet basic needs in their house. Or if you're a senior, you make a choice between rent or mortgage and paying your prescriptions. So again, improving and increasing the supply is what these facts show us repeatedly. And just to get more to the conversation that I think you wanted to focus on today is looking at some key findings around how do we build more, right? How do we get and work closely with our local partners to increase the supply? There are currently 17 municipalities, including Providence Seaside, that allow multifamily housing by right. And that's an important zoning distinction, which means that you can build multifamily units in those neighborhoods and communities by right, in which in theory would expedite the process for building and developing in those communities. Of the remaining 23 municipalities that do not allow multifamily by right, 6 have infrastructure that can support multifamily housing in that they have full public water and sewer. And so that is also a critical conversation as we move forward in this. Eight municipalities of that 23 have a combination of full water and partial sewer, or full water and no sewer, and 15 more municipalities have partial water and sewer access. Water and sewer and those infrastructure issues are very, very critical for us to know where to build, right? And where to encourage developments. To the Secretary's point, how do we approach those communities and say, Commerce has some funding and money that can help you address some of those issues. How do we work with the infrastructure bank to address the underlying issues? A lot of technological changes have happened, particularly with sewer and water systems. So even those communities that only have partial water and sewer, with new technology could increase their capacity and allow for more building and developing. Currently, our housing stock is approximately 468,000 units, and 44% of which is multifamily. So this is the other slide that's challenging news, and the Secretary also talked a little bit about some of this already as well too. But we have, as this chart shows, we just have simply not been building enough, and we have not been building enough for a long period of time. The issuance of residential building permits hit a high water mark in the state with about 7,200 total permits in 1986. 1986. That was a long time ago, right? And the high in the 90s was 3,414 in 1999. So we were already seeing the decrease in production in the late 90s as well. But these numbers are dwarfed with the average in 2009. This was just kind of before the real estate market crash. We saw about 2,100 permits, down from that 7,000 or so from 1986. And as an average between 2010 and 2020 of only about 1,000 permits annually. That permit level is not enough to meet, definitely not to meet current demand, but also does not allow for any growth and development. So as new jobs, or as Commerce, does a great job trying to attract new businesses or new companies into the state, there's simply no place for workers to live, or at least live affordably, particularly for workers at the lower wage level. Again, just more ways to see this and to say to show you some of that data. So we can go on. So I wanted just to be clear, and I think many folks, and I certainly know the Lieutenant Governor and others on this, but just to remind everyone and to point out that Rhode Island has a law in the books called the Low to Moderate Income Housing Act that was passed about 25 years ago now, which is essentially does a couple of things. One is create that 10% goal for communities, which we'll talk about for a minute, but more importantly, gives us the definition, and really the only definition that we have in state law about what we mean by low to moderate income housing. And as you can see, it means any housing which is built or operated by a public agency or a nonprofit organization or a limited equity housing co-op or private developer. And in order to be able to count towards the community's 10% goal that this act also establishes for every community, it has to meet a three-part test. And that is that it has to be subsidized with a federal, state, or municipal government subsidy, assist in the construction and rehab of housing affordable to low to moderate income households. And that's generally for rental units defined as 80% of median income or below. So it has to target income level, and more importantly, it has to remain affordable for a long period of time, for at least for no less than 33 years in the from initial occupancy. We can go on. So as I mentioned, the Low Mod Housing Act has within it a 10% goal for all communities that has been encouraging all communities to work towards having at least 10% of their housing stock as affordable. As you know, we have been stuck for a long period of time at that only 6 of those 39 communities actually meet that goal. That goal is an important goal for a couple of reasons, not so much the number. Quite frankly, even if every community was at 10%, we would still not have enough affordable units, particularly for lower income individuals. But it's a goal because it says to all communities, we're all in this together. Everybody needs to work towards this. The number doesn't matter so much to me in my head, so much as it does that people are working and making progress towards that goal. And the reality is that many, many people have not. And particularly in some of our areas like a Cranston or a West Warwick that have public water, have public sewer, they are a long way from meeting that goal. And those communities are technically exempt under a crazy formula in the act as well too. But as we think about where to go and where to develop, these are the charts in the areas. I think the other important piece about this is that this 10% goal in Low Mod Housing Act was created at a time that in other states also created them, that it's a fair share act. It's a fair housing issue. We're saying that every community needs to step up and lean in and help solve this problem, but also that everybody should have an ability to choose where they want to live or be close to where they want to be. And every community listed in all of our 39 communities has low to moderate income workers. There are people who are home watching our children every day at daycare. There are people who are watching our parents and our grandparents. There are retail workers. There are people who work in deliveries and construction and all other places. These are workers that work throughout the state and are needed in every community throughout the state, and yet way too many of them are priced out of communities that they would like to live in. So that fair share concept, that fair housing goal is part of the real heart behind Low Mod Act. The Secretary also referred to the commission that he'll be presenting at, that I had the pleasure of presenting at a couple of weeks ago as well too, is looking at that act to see what are the right levers that we need to change in that act to provide more incentives to communities. What are the carrots, but potentially also what are the sticks? To be fair to communities, I don't think we've given them the tools that they needed, and we never did under the act to do what they need to do. Some communities had more capacity and have moved forward, but there are things that I think we can do to incentivize communities to encourage more development. I think I'm close to the end, so I'll stop there. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Brenda. This was great information. And I'm going to bring Frank, and then after I'm going to bring you back so the three of us can have a conversation after. But next, we're going to hear from Frank Shea. Frank Shea, I had the pleasure to work with him for many years in the Olneyville neighborhood through the work that he did with Olneyville Housing, now One Neighborhood Builder. I was able to witness the transformation that can happen in a neighborhood when you build housing and you build affordable housing. So it's a pleasure for me to introduce Frank Shea, now the Director of the Women's Development Corporation. Frank, welcome.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor, for convening these conversations, your continued leadership on this subject. It's been 20 years that we've worked together on creating housing, which we started when we were in kindergarten.
Yes, we were.
Must have. So, but it's been great to see you in this new role, kind of bringing the focus, the skills that you had, that I witnessed, early in 2000s in a community level, to be able to bring this to a statewide audience. And thanks for convening this conversation. Also wanted to thank Secretary Pryor for all he's done to elevate housing as an issue for all Rhode Islanders to be concerned with, including the comments earlier in this conversation. In addition to the issues of equity, and fairness, it's an issue of economic competitiveness as a state, and the availability of housing at all price points is critical for our state. Excuse me. It's an important and timely conversation. I've been doing this for a long time, but it seems like the environment and the potential for real progress is possible now in a way that wasn't before, and I think that's testament the leadership that both of you have played in making that possible. The next slide is, as Sabina said, I'm Executive Director of Women's Development Corporation. If you could hit the next slide. Founded by, these innovative women, true innovators in 1979. They were experts in architecture, planning, design, historical preservation. Some of you recognize Alma Green in the front and Susan Atchison over her right shoulder. They created a tremendous legacy that we try to live up to as an organization. The next slide. We develop, own, and manage affordable homes for families, older adults, veterans, individuals with special needs. This is 20 Willis Street in New Bedford. Sorry for the non-Rhode Island example. It was completed last year, 30 units of permanent supportive housing developed by WDC in partnership with Veterans Transitional Housing in New Bedford. In addition to housing for previously homeless veterans, there's a commercial kitchen, dining space, community space in that building, and it's serving a fantastic need. Excuse me. A number of our properties serve individuals, if you want to do the next slide, with special needs, and we work with service providers to provide those supports. We also provide management services. One of the unique things about WDC is we have a property management arm, Housing Opportunities Corporation, and we contract with owners of properties serving special needs to provide the property management expertise while they provide the services to their populations. We had started out, in the 70s, 80s, primarily in Providence, but now developed kind of all over southeastern New England. If you want to go to the next slide. We still have a significant presence in South Providence and Elmwood. It's where our main office is located. But we do a significant amount of work in suburban and even rural Rhode Island. And I think we've learned a great deal that hopefully is relevant for today's conversation around the role of municipalities in providing their share. The next slide is Shannock Falls, which is a 43-unit project in Charleston and Richmond, Rhode Island, completed in 2020, financed, with tax credits, the usual assortment of funds from Rhode Island Housing, some CDBG and local support from the community and the Office of Housing and Community Development. When you develop in communities without a long history of deed-restricted affordable housing, there can be a lot of misconceptions that you need to address, and one of them had come up in the comments earlier, and that's the need that exists in the community. If you want to go to the next slide. Excuse me. People feel like there isn't that need in their town, and there aren't people who need the kind of provision, the kind of assistance that these properties provide. When we completed Shannock Falls, it leased up quickly as any affordable housing development would in the environment that we've spoken about. And 85% of the families, when we look to see where did they live before, lived in Charleston, Richmond, other South County communities. So, pretty much all the families were already, nearby in these communities, dealing with excessive rent burdens, because as Brenda and as the Housing Fact Book tells us, the housing just isn't available. And that all just makes sense, that previously, a generation ago, these towns, in towns anywhere in a high cost market like we have, would have had, places to provide for everyone in the town. The public works people, the teachers, the retail workers, the people providing services, working in the nursing homes and such. And everybody kind of had a place in the town, but we know that doesn't exist anymore. So that kind of speaks to why this need is there. And we see that that we see that need, and that need kind of exists in every community, and this was just more evidence to that. The next slide, if you could. I think that every community has appropriate sites that we talked about. How do you don't want to build something that doesn't fit in the community, and I think the work we do with the history of planning and excellent design is to come up with sites that are appropriate. Cost, it's impossible to basically build if a town only allows for single families on large lots. That's not a cost effective or way to make affordable housing possible. But it doesn't mean that you're building like a 1940s style public housing that you're plopping in the middle of what was previously a farm. But it does mean finding, working with the towns to find sites that are appropriate for maybe a higher level of density than the town has elsewhere. And a lot of village centers, finding sites like that are appropriate. So Shannock is close to the village centers there. So I think the design fits very well in with the existing vernacular, as the architects like to say. And it doesn't stand out as something for others. It stands out as housing that's part of the town. And a lot of times these village centers will be close to some amenities. There might be a store. Ideally, there might be a bus line that provides a way to link these communities for folks who may not have access in another, for moving around and things like this. And as has been said earlier, is, the insightful communities are working with developers to try to develop these sites, find the places where it's appropriate, find the places where it fits, and work with the developer to get there. And an example of that, is on the next slide, which is our Pine View Apartments in Exeter. Excuse me, I drank most of my water while the other people were talking, which wasn't a good idea at all. But this project went into construction earlier in the summer, 40 units of family housing starting next year. We had a really good process that was helpful with the town of Exeter. Another developer had identified the site, more than a decade ago, and the project hadn't moved forward. The town, shared our belief that it was an appropriate site for that use. We went through a zoning process where, we had a chance to explain the project in depth to people in the town, hear from neighbors, hear from the town around, things. We were able to make improvements in response to the feedback that we got and to address those concerns, and it was a very good, the process it should be, where we kind of say, here's what we'd like to do. The town has a chance to say, oh, we're concerned about this or that, and we get to work through those issues in a productive fashion. The town was clearly motivated to help reach its 10% goal, and that was something that the town felt like, this project from the fact book, this project will bring them 2% closer to their goal. And that was clearly a motivator for the town as well. So it's good to have an insightful town like that. The next slide, I really wish I had a better rendering than this, but you'll be able to see it all when it's completed next year. We'll have everybody out for a nice event to celebrate it. But this design by Union Studios fits really well within the character of a traditional Rhode Island village housing style. This is one of 10 buildings in the project that has 4 units each. There's a lot of privacy in the design for the families that will live there, and they're spaced out well on the site. The next slide.
Frank,
yes.
Can I go back a little bit? So this
Sure.
is an apartment. It is a one building that has
Yes.
4 units on it.
Exactly.
Can we go back so when you look at the next one, no, I'm sorry, the other way, this one, okay? So when you look at this structure, you're not thinking that it's a multi-family
Right.
unit, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so it does fit, a little bit bigger than a single family home, but not that much.
Okay.
And, with the roof lines and the kind of style and the porches, that make it fit. Exactly.
Thank you. Next slide.
And then, so here is a project shot from last week, actually. And one of the things that we've learned, which has also come up earlier, is there can be costs involved that you wouldn't have in other kinds of communities. And prior to working in this role, I mostly worked in urban settings, Onlyville, as you mentioned, Roxbury and Jamaica Plain and Dorchester and Boston. And so this city kid's been learning a lot about septic and wells and things like that. And they all do have a cost. I'm glad that Secretary Pryor mentioned the funding through Commerce, because I was going to cite that as a good bit of progress that's happened. The site readiness program, being funded for the first time and being available for the first time. I really hate to use Massachusetts examples in sessions like this, because we do too much of it.
We always do that. That's fine. Go for it. Go for it.
But the MassWorks program in Massachusetts is a really great tool, and it brings infrastructure funding that makes a site viable. And I think that the site readiness program really has the potential to do that, and to kind of open the door for municipalities or developers trying to work in communities like this. And so if even before Secretary mentioned it, it was in my comments as a great bit of progress. So glad it came up there. And with that, I've probably exceeded my time. I wasn't looking at the clock, but.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you, Frank. So I want to bring Brenda back to the conversation. I know because of the meeting that is happening after this one, that the is actually the committee that was created by Speaker Shikashi to look at the housing issues that we have. They're having a meeting today at 1:15. So our conversation is going to be a little bit limited, but there's some important things that we would like to touch on. So can we have both Frank and Brenda at the same time to have this conversation? And I think the first question is, what are some of the misconceptions about low to moderate income housing, and how can we change them?
I'll start. I mean, again, these are not new problems. These are problems that we've seen for a long time, and we can't forget that a lot of these conversations also have an undertone and an overtone of both classism and racism in these conversations. But think back to the chart that I showed, or the information I told about the fastest growing jobs in the state. My guess is that everybody on this call knows or is a home health aide, or a daycare worker, or a retail worker, or a nurse, or a teacher, or all of these positions are people they know. 1 out of 3 Rhode Islanders are cost burden. So that means that somebody either on this call or in your family or in your network, or people who support you to make your life easier, are people who we're talking about. So I think doing a better job of not only the beautiful pictures that Frank just showed of buildings and developments, but also showing more pictures of the people living in those developments and the faces of those developments, and making sure that people know that these are our neighbors and communities. These are people who you go to church with. These are people who you, like I said, take care of your children and take care of your parents and grandparents. So it's a lot of just information and education. A lot of it is what Frank has talked about, is just being and being a resource to the local community, showing them that pretty much every time we build a development, there's comments at meetings, we're just going to clear out South Providence and have everybody move to these communities. And the reality is, the numbers that Frank showed, it's people who are already in those communities that can't find affordable housing. So I think it's just a constant beating the drum. It's a constant job of messaging. It's a constant job of having people who are benefiting from affordable housing. I think we forget that all of us live in subsidized housing, whether or not you are a homeowner or a renter. The biggest housing program by far in our federal government is the mortgage interest deduction. And if you are a homeowner and you take the mortgage interest deduction, you are getting a subsidy through the tax side, but you are getting a subsidy from the federal government. When you say that in meetings, people get very upset and very unhappy, but that is the reality. So, get over it and figure out how we can work together to make sure there's opportunity and choice in every neighborhood.
And I think, a lot flows from just that, who these developments serve. And I think sometimes we're our own worst enemies, because we describe our programs as, median income this, and the kind of technical speak that we need to get the resources to do the development. We need to speak to an audience in a different way about who these serve. And as Brenda did effectively there, these are people that are in your community and need to be, and your community's better off if you're providing housing. But it's, it's a burden that all of us share. And then there's further misconceptions that flow out of that. So, family housing in a community like this is going to bring a lot of kids here. So if we're actually housing people who are already here, they're already in the school system, and one of the other great things that's happened at Shannock is we've had a great relationship with the Richmond Elementary School, where a number of the kids in the development go, and the principal's been very proactive in making connections to make sure that we can partner on supports for the kids. But there's a lot of, the misconceptions that can be thrown up, can form as a block, for communities and a way for them to stop development like this.
Thank you. And again, as Brenda mentioned, the things that we hear in those meetings when we go advocating for affordable housing, it shows the racism, how it comes across for people that don't even realize how their comment is so racist. But we have heard plenty of those through those process. I just want to ask you now, for anyone that is watching us, any Rhode Islander that would like to see the development of more affordable housing to help with this crisis that's happening in their community, how can they help? What are the things that would help you the most from those individuals that are watching right now?
I'll start, Frank, unless you want to.
Sure,
so
go
a
for it.
project that we are just embarking on with some great funding and support from a longtime partner, United Way, is trying to do some more training around land use and decision-making process for local groups and advocates. We work closely with the planners and others in communities. They are often very supportive of the work. But then when you get to a town hall meeting or you get to a zoning board meeting, you meet neighborhood opposition and neighborhood objections. So if you don't already know who's on the planning board in your local community, you should know that, and you should start to pay attention to those meetings. If you don't know who's on zoning board in your community, if you would like to be on planning board and zoning board in your community, you should think about that as well too. And so a lot of those decisions at the local level get made at that level, and helping people understand the development process, understanding the triggers where they can have the most impact on developing. Our colleagues, again, in Massachusetts, both Frank and I have Massachusetts experience, did a study with UMass a couple of years back, analyzing who attends public meetings for affordable housing developments, and overwhelmingly only the opposition turns out at those meetings. And so it's people who are no, too much, we don't want more kids in our school, it's too much parking, too much whatever, no more traffic. At senior developments, we always hear that it will increase the rescue calls to the development. I mean, there's always an objection no matter what we do. And some of those legitimate, there's legitimate issues around traffic that you have to address. We certainly have to address environmental issues, but there's nobody there providing the counter voice. There's not the home health aide that says, oh, your grandmother who wants to age in place in community needs me to come in 3 times a day, or needs me to transport her to doctor's appointments. If in order for the seniors in your community, and remember what I said, 1 in 4 of us are going to be 65 or older very soon in Rhode Island. All of us baby boomers starting to get a lot older. They are going to need that support, and they need the support of those workers. So where are those workers going to live? And if they have to live 45 minutes to an hour away in order to find affordable housing, their ability to provide service to that person in that community is going to be limited and restricted.
I agree. I think that that's a great point. Being willing to step forward and be the voice of support, and identifying as someone in support of this, because it's so easy for people to kind of come forward and just be, against a project, but, getting educated around these issues so that when misconceptions come up, we're able to kind of bring facts. When you look nationally at, there's such a need for more facts in most of our public discourse. And this is another place where that plays out. But being able to be in touch with your local elected officials, to say, this is a good project, this is something that our community needs for these reasons, and I'm supportive. Because the people who would be against it, it's very easy for them to play an outsized role, and a lot of times by misconceptions.
Thank you both. So I have a final question, and is based on your experience and seeing some municipalities that have been making progress, what are the factors that you think contribute the most for a municipality to make progress towards the 10% requirement?
Go ahead, Brenda.
Okay, sorry. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff. So I think there's a couple of characteristics. One is definitely infrastructure. First of all, they've got, water, sewer, they've got some infrastructure. It makes sense. We haven't even touched on transportation, but, access to transportation, access to other resources is critical. Good quality planning staff and local staff that can review these, understand pro formas, understand how, what questions to ask, and what, how to do their due diligence. And in many communities, particularly smaller communities, they are understaffed greatly in that area. And so I think that's a way that we can continue to support that work as well. Many of those communities, unlike others, and again, we haven't given them the resources to not only do their housing plans, but to keep them updated and to keep looking for opportunities. In that, those communities generally have thought through where they want to promote growth and development, and have looked at actual sites and looked at actual parcels of land to do that. So local capacity, expertise on the planning and zoning level, a plan in place that's reasonable and action driven, not just, oh, we think housing's great, but, we have no intention of building it, but with some specific plans as to how to build it. And then local support, right? And either in the mayor's office and or city council or other people who kind of champion that work and keep asking people, how come, why not? Are we not moving forward on this? To me, those are things that we see in communities that have made some progress.
And again, I agree, kind of 100%. And also, having the carrot and stick, and the stick, unfortunately, is needed as well. And it's great that the Low and Moderate Income Housing Act is being reviewed, and appreciate, the moment in time that we have here in Rhode Island. The SHAB process is, less than perfect, but it is something that a town, an insightful town would like to be able to get to a point where they're not subject to that. And so having that as a stick as well, in addition to the more important, things that Brenda mentioned, is a helpful thing to help a town get there also.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both. This information, I was so looking forward to it. I wish we had more time because I have more questions or things that we can talk about and learn from both of you. But this has been a great conversation. Thank you for being part of the conversation. We have a meeting after this. We're going to go and join the conversation that's happening with the General Assembly members that are taking the issue of housing. As we said earlier, this is a good timing because we have the leadership of the House with the Speaker Shikashi. We have also leadership of the Senate with Senator Ruggiero. We have the Governor McKee and my office also all working together to address the challenges of the housing crisis that we are on right now. I want to thank Secretary Pryor for his partnership in this conversation. He's already in the room for the next meeting. That's why he's not here with us right now. And I want to thank also Christine Hunsinger for the update on the rent relief. So, and a reminder to everyone, there is funding available. We still have more than $150 million available for rent relief. If you're having challenges right now paying your rent, make sure that you check the RentReliefRI or go through the Rhode Island Housing website. There is money available to pay rent that you owe. If you're looking to rent an apartment, you can get funding for down payment. There is money available also to pay for the utility bills. Okay, so make sure you check that out. One final thing that from all this conversation, I am been thinking while we were talking here is that we need a marketing firm to take on this conversation. So maybe we should start planning on getting a marketing firm involved to help us bring the message. What do you think?
Yeah, a Faces and Places campaign. We always say that it has to be about, compassion, but it also has to be about changing hearts and minds as well too. And I think it's much harder to be negative about an affordable housing development when you're sitting across the table from somebody who raises their hand and says, and I need it. And I grew up in this community and I need some help.
Yeah. And that's one of the things when I'm talking to the different communities, I let them know there is a need in your community for affordable housing. There are individuals right here that would like to stay here that cannot afford, or there is probably someone that already is planning to retire, right? And their income is going to change, but they want to stay in the community where they have been all along.
Right.
So we
and
have
that's
some issue. Yep. Go ahead.
That's
Brenda.
a huge issue for seniors to, there's no place to downsize to. The options are, to stay in your home and try to get the necessary services that you need to do that. We have, assisted living and others, but those are often all very high end and high cost expenses and not available for everybody. So it's a big challenge.
I could keep going and going, so we have to stop here. Thank you all. Thank you for turning in, and thank you for checking these conversations. And the next conversation is going to be coming. The next Lunch and Learn is going to be about housing and health equity. So stay tuned. This is very important. That's going to be our next topic. Okay.
Great.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for your leadership. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.